The Kremlin's oil depots are on fire. The Ukrainian defense forces are working carefully. The FSB buildings are also burning, and disgruntled guerrillas are blowing them up, according to our intelligence. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is explaining why it cannot shoot down hostile Russian air targets over our territory. But Mark Rutte, the new NATO Secretary General, who visited on the third day, is not afraid of anything, holding their positions in Ukraine. We don't talk about this now. 3 topics, 30 minutes. Valeriy Klochok, head of the Center for Public Civic Analytics, Vesha. Valeriy, congratulations. Glory to Ukraine. Dear friends, we received good news on Friday morning. We love it when everything is on fire, and we estimate that at least 60 specialists and up to 24 vehicles are trying to put it out. The General Staff confirms the strike on the oil depot. Last night, Ukrainian defense forces struck at a fuel and lubricant storage base, Annanafteprodukt, near the village of Anna. The General Staff's press service states that Russian air defense systems malfunctioned while operating over the facility, hitting a vertical tank and causing a fire. Voronezh region governor Alexei Smirnov confirmed the drone attack on the oil depot, stating that attempts were made to suppress Ukrainian drones in the Voronezh district. He noted on his Telegram channel that one drone fell on the oil depot, which is in the Perm region, where a fire is currently burning. This has caused significant unrest in the area. Previously, it was also hit by drones, and the Ministry of Emergency Situations of the Russian Federation released this footage, which is just warming this fall. Isn't that right, Mr. Valeriy? What should we understand from the fact that the oil depots are being targeted again and the Kremlin's inadequate defense of them? The situation regarding the destruction of oil depots is intriguing. In the Perm territory, it appears that no significant damage occurred, based on my information. I want to highlight this in relation to the FSB building that is reportedly on fire. I suspect that saboteurs or guerrillas may be operating in the Perm region and contributing to these incidents. The attack on Annanafteprodukt reflects a trend that I hope continues.
Щоб щось зайнялося. А що стосується удару вже у Annanafteprodukt, то тут, звісно, що Ганнушка...
Namely, the continued destruction of the infrastructure of the Russian oil industry, which is directly related to Russia's war against Ukraine. They supply the world with oil products, of course, for their fighters, and we need to reduce this. In addition, this is also the situation with the state budget revenues. From the sale of light oil products in Russia. There is a large set of issues that are useful to us. I wish our intelligence officers to continue these attacks. The more we destroy these seemingly civilian innocent objects in Russia, the greater the negative effect on the Russians themselves, so that they think a little bit about why this is happening. I would like to see long-range Western weapons start flying directly to the warehouses of the kits, just like yesterday. We recorded that one of the airfields in Russia was used for the arrival in Boryspilsk. This is all systematic work that will really help us. It is not enough, of course, but the trend is very, very good. It is often said that it is not enough to work on oil depots, because there are thousands of them all over Russia. The Russian Federation probably needs to work out thousands of dollars in oil refineries. But how much does this also affect the financing and fuel for the Kremlin's military system and military machine in economic terms? When we were recording the first overflights of oil refineries in Russia last year, I heard comments from Ukrainian experts who know about the economy and so on. They say that there is no logic in striking oil refineries. Why? Because it reduces the capacity in general. The logic of Russian oil exports abroad is strange, although by and large, it has little or no effect on Russian oil exports abroad, and this may lead to an increase in oil prices in general on the world market. If we look at the trend of rising and falling prices for Brent and Russian Urals crude oil, they certainly depend on each other. Price fluctuations can be observed in statements from high-ranking officials, including the U.S. president, regardless of who it is, as well as in the context of the Middle East theater of operations. Russia has a really large share in the global oil industry, its oil, and it can regulate prices, of course, but not refineries, because refineries are a story about the domestic Russian market, and they do not bring in large revenues to the budget. Most of the revenues to the state budget of the Russian Federation come from oil sales. For example, Russia and statistics show that their state budget revenues increased in the first half of the year. And at least this is the information that was published yesterday by Annanafteprodukt, which I can trust more or less. For example, revenues from oil sales abroad increased by almost 40% in the first half of the year alone, and other sources report that it was even more, up to 50% or more. This shows that our strikes on refineries may seem ineffective at first glance when someone tells you, but they do not affect Russia's participation in the global oil market at all. Because strikes on refineries are primarily about disabling facilities that help the Russian military-industrial complex to exist. While there may be many drones, even 500 or 1,000 can be destroyed. We are ramping up drone production, and I hope the president's statement about our capability of 4 million drones translates into actual production. Особовому складу на Сході чи в Kurskій області росіян, а й в тому числі це будуть безпілотники літакового типу. They should not only target Russian personnel in the east or in the Kursk region, but also aircraft-type drones that have already proven themselves, and they will also reach those targets. Here we are talking about a truly domestic Russian context, not a geopolitical one. Please note that, for example, Novosibirsk is an oil transshipment base, and no one is hitting it. Kazakh and Russian oil are transported by a shadowy fleet to the Mediterranean, where they are redistributed to global markets. India imports a significant amount of Russian oil, so the focus is not on the oil itself or its prices, but on price fluctuations. We aim to keep prices lower, primarily to destabilize the situation in Russia. However, we aren't seeing significant results that would favor us, such as a decrease in Russian state budget revenues by $1 billion or $2. Clearly, there is no effect here. I apologize for interrupting, but I want to emphasize that this is normal and part of the right approach. We're working on a large scale across all areas and are making progress in the right direction. The regional office of the FSB of the Russian Federation burned down in Novosibirsk, just like that. This was reported by the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine. In Novosibirsk, the FSB office burned down. Flammable mixtures were thrown through the broken window and set on fire. This is just one case of attacks on state institutions inside Russia. There is a growing number of people ready to take radical actions against the Kremlin regime. Valeriy, is this a result of war fatigue, hatred for the Putin regime, or a desire for financial gain? Regardless of the motivation, the key is the outcome. More people are ready to take radical action against the Kremlin regime, which fuels their incendiary actions. They're not just wandering around with flashlights. The fact is that we really missed such reports, because a few months ago we saw a lot of facts when military commissariats were burned. These actions were typically recorded on video cameras and were often carried out by elderly women and men. It's no secret that those involved are being influenced in various ways to prevent the burning of military enlistment offices. By showcasing this process publicly, they are shaping a different perception of the regime, contrasting with the general view among the Russian population that the regime is taking action. The story of the FSB burning is a continuation of this trend, which we lost in the last period. This raises questions for the authorities, as I believe this is a correct direction. If this trend resumes and becomes large-scale, it doesn't matter whether it's driven by ideological beliefs or financial gain. The important thing is the outcome. A picture of dissatisfaction with the Russian government is emerging, which could lead to social protests and greater societal activism. I hope there is an active public segment ready to seek independence from the Putin regime. Our intelligence should continue targeting military commissariats and security force buildings, as this strategy is effectively destabilizing the situation. The destruction of oil refineries is also significant, as these actions can serve as catalysts for regime change, not solely due to internal decisions, but also because of external pressures.
Адміністративних будівель силовиків і таке інше, це те, чим має займатися наша розвідка, і вона, я вбачаю, зараз дуже успішно це продовжує робити, так само, як і знищення нафтопереробних заводів. Тому що ми зараз говоримо не про економічну складову, не про військову,
Even if we take this analogy, I sometimes cite it. Once upon a time in the history of the Soviet Union, there was an event, the Great October Socialist Revolution, that Lenin carried out while practically in ecstasy. But he came to Russia and had good funding from the Kaiser's Germany to organize these processes. Plus, he took advantage of the situation after February 1917, the so-called palace coup, when the emperor was removed from power. Against the backdrop of World War I, turmoil, and so on, the situation was favorable for the Bolsheviks, and they carried out another coup in Russia.
І на тлі Першої світової війни, негараздів і таке інше, тобто складалась сприятлива ситуація для більшовиків, і вони здійснили...
While people and circumstances may change, methods and principles often remain constant. Defeating Russia in a conventional conflict will be challenging, as it continues to invest heavily in its military-industrial complex, with 2025 expected to be a record year. Despite hopes that 2024 would bring an end to the conflict, claims of an imminent collapse of the Russian economy have not materialized. The sanctions against Russia are too weak. For example, we haven't targeted the oil refinery base in Novosibirsk, which aids in Russian oil exports and supports global prices. This aligns with a larger trend, as the Saudis are unhappy with the current state of the oil industry and their price-regulating role. The arson attacks may help shape foreign public opinion in Russia and potentially bring change. This can encourage them to take concrete action. This does not mean that they will get up and leave tomorrow, but it needs to be done systematically and scaled up in any way possible. I remember recently there were also cases where they worked very well, hiring some teenagers to burn helicopters at airfields. It's cool. The only thing I wish was that there were several such news stories every day. Why? Because then it goes viral in the Telegraph, which is in Russia. And we need to use it for that. You can fight the enemy with his own weapons. It's very simple. It doesn't take a lot of money. I am convinced that for 10,000 rubles, a teenager can easily throw a Molotov bottle into a room or burn a military vehicle. The Russians do this here, and they do it very effectively, because our teenagers do not understand what is happening and burn military vehicles. Why are we silent? It's not difficult. Once again, there are many ways to make anonymous payments today. I probably won't reveal the secret that there are a lot of them, so I want to have the opportunity and resources to scale. Why is Russia provoking nuclear blackmail around the Kursk nuclear power plant, claiming that either cameras or drones are involved? What is the purpose of these statements in the political and geopolitical context, Valeriy? The answer to this question, as soon as you suggested it to me, I made a corresponding review on my channel this morning and mentioned the history of statements not by Putin, not by Kurchatov, and Kim Jong-un, the dictator of East Asia, North Korea. Today he said that if someone tries to attack his sovereign country, he will use the entire arsenal of weapons he has, including nuclear weapons, word for word. Putin echoes this sentiment, as does Lukashenko, although Lukashenko's situation is different and he is clearly struggling. Recently, chessmen were seen flying over Belarus, and one even exploded on Belarusian territory, leaving him silent. Despite this, he continues to engage in nuclear rhetoric. Today, neither North Korea nor Putin has the means to achieve their ambitious goals, such as restoring the Soviet Union or preventing the spread of democracy. While the dictatorial world is resisting these trends, there are threats to it.
Трендів, які в світі просуваються, саме поширення демократії і знищення авторитарних режимів, звісно, ця боротьба дуже гостра. І диктаторський світ тримається стійко на своїх ногах, але загрози йому є.
As citizens everywhere have the right to live freely in democratic societies.
В першу чергу, громадяни будь-якої країни мають право жити вільно і в вільній країні.
I understand that the people of North Korea are overwhelmingly hostages of this regime. Yesterday's event in Kurchatov is an attempt to inform the world that we have nuclear weapons. You can't joke. It's a provocation. It's absolutely clear. Just recently, even Lukashenko complained to Magatha that he was allegedly accused of wanting to seize the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. That is, everything is nonsense, that he dreamed again. You know, he dreamed of his childhood again. And Lukashenko is trying to tell us that there is some kind of threat from outside. Yes, there is. It is a threat to the existence of the Belarusian regime itself, which is now supported by Russia. This is the only serious argument left.
Звісно, можна там змінювати процеси і тривалість цих коливань, але що стосується ядерної риторики, яку зараз продовжує Росія, це єдиний у них аргумент серйозний, який залишився для того,
to present to Joe Biden and others. They say, look, we can nuke you. While few truly believe it, there's an understanding that two unpredictable leaders, Kim Jong-un and Putin, might push the button. This uncertainty is something we leverage. For instance, Boris Johnson mentioned that if Trump were in office, he would be unconstrained and would prevent Putin from attacking.
І ми любимо оперувати, полюбляємо. От, до прикладу, сьогодні Борис Джонсон оперував нею, котре сказав, що от якби Трамп був, він же ж не...
Putin's remarks on nuclear weapons, along with provocations in Kurchatov and statements from Kim Jong-un and Lukashenko, serve to remind the world of Russia's nuclear capability. This narrative emphasizes their arsenal and potential use. and it's crucial for the world to grasp this situation, as it complicates the response to these threats. After all, they need the sine wave to develop upward for as long as possible, so that stability for their countries is more permanent, bigger, and longer, so that they stay in power longer. This is also one of the arguments why the West is acting today. But putting the whole world in danger because two idiots are sitting on the red buttons, something has to be done about it and stopped. I understand that this is not easy, but if you say that everything is complicated, then let the special services answer and explain, at least to themselves, why this happened. That 1,500 pagers exploded in Lebanon. Is it possible to do this? Despite 15 years of preparation, eliminating figures like Hassan Nasrallah is possible, even from bunkers. There is a lack of political will. If one truly fights terrorism, Kim Jong-un, Putin, and Lukashenko should be seen as a unified group of terrorists that need to be eliminated. They cannot continue to manipulate 140 million Russians with their propaganda. This is an abnormal story. You undermine the value of a human being in general. You undermine your authority. You undermine the human right to simply live in the world. Yes, unfortunately, this is the truth now, and it can't be like this. Why do these mystics remain? They are not burned with terrorists, genocidaires, because the Pentagon comes out and says that we are talking about two very different landscapes and battlefields. Sabrina Singh, a spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Defense, comments on the fact that NATO countries will not shoot down missiles and drones over Ukraine because such actions, she says, not for the first time, will draw them into a war with Russia. I quote, Singh said, Biden has made a commitment that the United States is not putting boots on the ground in Ukraine, but we support Ukraine in its efforts to regain its sovereign territory. I'm unclear about the resolution regarding unavailable boots. While we understand that the military contingent won't be coming, we discussed self-defense yesterday. Why did the Pentagon respond after President Zelensky warned that NATO shooting down air targets over Ukraine would be a jinx for him? Mark Rutte, the new NATO Secretary General, who also asked Zelensky this question, but said that the allies were not ready. Obviously, Rutte was being more than abstract in this answer. Why is this happening again? Today, I discussed Rutte with my colleagues and pointed out that we view U.S. policy through the lens of the Ukrainian issue, believing that the U.S. will make decisions in our favor against a powerful terrorist Russia. We need to be realistic and understand that each country looks at Russia's war against Ukraine through the prism of its own interests. And Mark Rutte looks at Russia's war against Ukraine through the prism of security for the whole of Europe. It actually repeats the words of the U.S. strategy. The Americans openly say that they have now found a tool that allows them to restrain dictatorial regimes in the world. This problem existed in the 60s of the last century, in the 50s, and in the 70s. We know about Russia's involvement in the Vietnam War and the unsuccessful experience in Iraq, which was also almost unsuccessful. That is, they realized that the strategy of direct participation of the U.S. military in wars around the world is not effective, because the cemetery is growing, and the dissatisfaction of voters, is growing. They don't vote for Republicans or Democrats on election day, when one or the other is in power. So they had to find another mechanism to restrain the dictatorial world. They found it, and it was Ukraine, not Russia. More precisely, it was not the Americans who provoked Russia to fight against us. No, it was Russia that wanted to do it. But they realize that if they do nothing, I will say a commonplace truth that has already been repeated 100 times. Russia will come to Europe and move on. In order to prevent this, what should be done? To mobilize Ukrainian society, to help it resist Russian aggression, to save the lives of all its soldiers, to achieve its goals. They have such a goal, and it has actually been achieved to date. We need to act accordingly. What do I mean by that? Under no circumstances should we quarrel with our partners who are helping us. First and second, we need to maximize our resources, mobilization, human, financial, and other resources, to explain to everyone that not only those guys in the trenches are fighting, we are all fighting. In the end, dear friends, yes, we must realize this. The government, those who are not in power, activists, ordinary Ukrainians, and those who are at the front, they are all equally responsible, not just those guys with weapons in the trenches, for the preservation of Ukraine. All resources should be directed to repel the enemy as much as possible. Believe me, this will lead to a shift in rhetoric in the West. For instance, we no longer hear condemnations from Western partners regarding strikes on refineries or the destruction of warehouses in Russia, which are 500 kilometers from our border. There's no rush. We could even target thermal power plants near Moscow, but we lack the resources. As the Americans say, listen, you can do it. Matthew Miller said, we need more money to make these weapons. Zelensky said that we can produce 4 million drones. We all need to take action, including the government, to keep funds in Ukraine and boost production. Instead of depending on the Czech Republic for 15mm shells, we should enhance our own production capabilities. We said, like the Israelis, if he doesn't want to help, we'll do it ourselves. The threat won't disappear on its own. This is one point of our victory plan that Zelensky hasn't presented yet. The Pentagon stance is, we won't interfere because this isn't our war. Russia attacked you, not us. They are correct in this regard, as they are concerned about how their voters will react. The Democrats are in the midst of an election process, and we can expect a decision that tomorrow we will have patriots shooting down air targets. It is fair to expect and to be outraged about this. Yes, we are ensuring their safety, but we need to draw appropriate conclusions. In fact, I would say that Ukraine has achieved a lot of positive things. If, for example, last year we only dreamed of a Patriot, today we have received another one from Romania. The White House has shifted its rhetoric, stating that all exports prioritize Ukraine due to its issues, but they will not engage in combat. They want to deplete Russia's military potential and are indifferent to when the regime changes. The American population generally supports this, and the U.S. has profited from weapons sales, $61 billion, most of which stays within the country, as we are not receiving any of that money. The share of money there is minimal. Therefore, I emphasize once again, we need to look at reality adequately, critically evaluate it, and work with it. There must be a healthy, very healthy state cynicism without losing national values. This is not an easy task in a time of war, and it should be borne, it should really be borne by the authorities on their shoulders. Ukraine needs to actively engage in confronting the Russian enemy instead of ignoring the situation. A healthy public dialogue between the government and Ukrainians is essential for positive developments. When the Pentagon states that they are not prepared, it is understandable that people respond with outrage and label it as fake news. But without constructive dialogue, nothing will change. The defense intelligence of Ukraine today resembles a strong news agency. On October 4th, it was reported that Andriy Korotkyi, the head of physical security at the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, was killed in an explosion in Enerhodar. Kurchatov, a collaborator involved in war crimes and the repression of Ukrainians, had been cooperating with the Russians since the occupation began on March 2nd, 2022. He provided the Russians with personal information on station employees, particularly targeting those with pro-Ukrainian views. His demise is seen as a deserved outcome for his actions.
В ньому перебував воєнний злочинець, начальник фізичної охорони Запорізької атомної електростанції Короткий Андрій Юрійович, і життя його теж довгим не видалося. Короткий колаборант, причетний до організації та виконання воєнних злочинів і репресій українців в окупації, катюзі по заслузі, як то кажуть. Після захоплення ЗС він добровільно пішов на співпрацю з російськими загарбниками, видав росіянам списки працівників станції з їхніми персональними
A good punishment. Will it be a signal to those who have not yet left our nuclear power plant? If we do not have a chamber in one place but across the entire plane, then, believe me, the tendency will be very favorable to us, and changes will come much faster. On this active professional note, I would like to thank you very much today, Mr. Valeriy. Thank you for this week for our interviews. We will see you on Monday. Please take care of yourself, and we'll see you then. Valeriy Klochok, head of the Center for Public Analysis, Vesha. Thank you for joining us for this half hour. We appreciate your engagement and growing viewership. Don't forget to leave your comments and subscribe to Mr. Valeriy's YouTube channel. You can find the link in the description below. You can also subscribe to YouTube 24, where we're approaching 8 million subscribers together. Take care and believe in the armed forces of Ukraine.